Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation on a Saturday night, 9 p.m. I welcome you all to be part of our fourth uh, webinar. I'm going to be introducing you to the project, to the session, to our speaker, and then general house rules. Please keep your video and your sound switched off. The panel is going to be for another 30 minutes, and then we will ask a few queries from our speaker, and then we will open to the public. If anybody of you want to ask any questions, you're most welcome to put them down in the chat box or use the emoticon sign of the hands, and then we will request you to speak up or be part of the discussion. So again, thank you so much for coming and logging in, registering yourself to this webinar. I'm going to now discuss and share some information on the webinar. This has been generously supported by Goethe Institute, Karachi, and PCCC, which is Pakistan Chowk Community Center, which has been established for the people to engage with arts and culture, pressing queries, radical thinking around Old Town, and the PCC has projects like the Cultural Center, which is now in a digital space, Heritage Walk Karachi, Spoken History Project, Old Town Mapping, and now this amazing webinar that we've been going through, plus 921 Heritage Talks. Plus 921 Heritage Talks is a project of Pakistan Chowk Community Center, where we are going to host webinars for every 6 months dedicated to discussing the politics of heritage and preservation in Pakistan, especially and also in general in South Asia. The dialogue on heritage is a global conversation which must take into account the local context in a rapidly changing world. The dialogue around the heritage preservation is shaped by many and relatively new factors. The parameters of what constitutes heritage are expanding and take into account not just the past and tangible heritage sites, but our present and as well as our current relationship with the spaces we inhabit as communities. At PCC, we aim to engage in comprehensive dialogue on the above questions by bringing together architects, researchers, urban planners, policymakers, designers, artists, journalists, filmmakers, bloggers, and activists to brainstorm ideas for the protection, for protecting, for conversing, for thinking of an extension on different queries, dialogue, rehabilitation, and accessibilities of heritage sites and public spaces. Plus 921 Heritage Talks hopes to bring all these stakeholders place of thinking of placemaking, where the past helps build new meanings for the future. Now, these webinars, have been scheduled for another 6 more talks. Our next session, which is going to be quite an exciting one, is Heritage Talks on politics of walking and witnessing, where we have a panel of 4, which will be on Sunday, 15th January at 7 p.m. Today's session is going to be on future of preservation. And the abstract for today's session is that the concepts regarding preservation and the future of heritage have evolved considerably over time. Heritage initially referred exclusively to monumental remains only. However, with time and parameters of what is considered as heritage have expanded to embrace living and contemporary cultures. In the age of urbanization, a very important question that arises in the context of rapidly urbanizing cities is how important is to preserve heritage sites for future generations? How can we develop resources and sustainable conservation plans needed to protect shared heritage when both do not exist on governmental level? In Karachi's context, preservation largely comes under the Sindh Cultural Act 1994, which still hasn't been utilized to its full potential due to lack of interest shown by the authorities and as well as the civil society for lack of awareness. Arif Hassan, the eminent architect, refers to Karachi and expresses while saying, while affection for buildings and history exists in the city, there's no respect for their conservation. Furthermore, he has reiterated in his books that due to the negligence of government and stakeholders, the heritage sites of Pakistan are rapidly deteriorating. What accounts for such neglects on state level? Moreover, what role can citizens and community play in preserving the heritage sites? We now welcome Tania Soomro. Tania Soomro is an architect who completed her master's in architecture from Belgium University in September 2015 and completed her bachelor's from Mehran University, Karachi in April 2009. She's associated with NED University as a lecturer in the Department of Architecture and Planning, and presently she is she's on a study leave for Ph.D. From Politecnico di Milano University in Italy. Thank you so much, Tania, for taking our time and sharing your views and your experiences on the topic, which is extremely important, not only for Karachi, but for South Asia. We welcome you, and you may now share your screen, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marvi and team at PCC, for constant changing of the times, because we were communicating from different time zones, but now everything is sorted. Thank you so much for a very detailed and generous introduction. One thing that I wanted to highlight here is basically how I ended up in this discipline of heritage conservation. Actually, my first job as planning identification of regarding my thoughts for this field, which ended up in my formal education. So while working in Heritage Cell, later on my master's and later my career as academic and then this PhD as well, I realized that how architectural research is important before initiating any project or any commitment. And this was also a point of realization that there was a huge gap between the understanding or implementation of the conservation theory into its practical approach. So that's why today's talk is basically future of heritage from a researcher's point of view. And before going to the formal presentation, I would like to give a small disclaimer that the facts that we are going to discuss today are basically extracted from the authentic data, which are supported by the personal experience or the counter narrative that exists at the moment. So today's presentation would be based on these three different parts. We are going to look at research as a backbone of any conservation project. Then we are looking at the Karachi Strategic Development Plan from a researcher's perspective, and then understanding Karachi as a case study for the development or any other schemes that has happened today. This presentation is basically based on Socratic method, where we will be constantly probing questions rather than directly jumping to the solution. So you are going to see a lot of question marks through this presentation and look at things from a researcher's perspective, because researcher's perspective is something which is very basic. It's from the stage where the project or any task has not even been started. So it's the basic thing. So let's go through the presentation. So yes. So first part of this presentation is based on research as a backbone of any project. So what actually research is? Research is basically a systematic investigation into study of material or sources in order to establish or come to a certain conclusion, which can actually be reutilized as a basis for any other research or any other project. So in a way, research is a continuous process or a never-ending process, you may call it. And now there are two different types of researches that we deal in a researcher fraternity. One is academic research, and other is the professional or any research that is particularly associated with any discipline. So academic research is basically focused on making discoveries or investigation for the scientific community, where a lot of archival or a lot of literary material is consulted. And the results of this research may not necessarily be applied in nature, but they can be used as beneficial basis for start of another research. On the other side, the architectural research or any professional research is basically result oriented. It's done from the intent of problem solving attitude, you may say. So this research is applied in nature. Its results are always implemented into a practical solution. So in case of architectural research, the case of RBT can be considered as an appropriate example because it involves investigation about the area which will be affected by this project, the number of buildings which will be under restoration, and so on. So now talking about the role of an architect, role of a researcher. In addition to all other performers, architectural researcher play a very pragmatic, protagonist role because he is responsible for delivering authentic or the correct factual information, which could be basis for any project, whether it's success or non-success, because we have seen through past many projects, many mega projects that let's take example of Karachi, Greater Karachi resettlement plan. The entire project was shelved just because the research on which the project was based was not authentic or not true as per the ground realities. So here the question arises, whether an architectural researcher or a professional researcher is even involved in conducting or initiating any conservation project in our local context. Not just the project, let's say in any task related to the heritage conservation, whether it be writing of the legislation, any act or ordinance. So because this is very much important because now this statement of the importance of researcher, I want to bring your attention to the Sindh Cultural Heritage Preservation Act. We are going to look at this act from a researcher's point of view. We are not going to go into the nitty-gritties of the law because we have already covered those details in our previous sessions. So now let's talk about how a researcher perceives this piece of writing, which is very much important. Talking about the preamble. Now, preamble is basically a pretext of any piece of writing, whether be it law, charter, ordinance, legal document, non-legal document, but it's the most important piece of data. It is actually the metadata which supports the actual text of the document. It gives you information starting from the definition to the detailed terminologies. Now, if you look at the preamble given in the Act, it's just 2 lines long, which actually tells, which actually is as, I'm going to read it now, whereas it is expedient to preserve and protect ancient places and objects of architectural, historical, archaeological, artistic, ethnological, anthropological, and national interest in the province of Sindh. So looking at this preamble, which is dealing with the entire province and dealing with multiple types of archaeological heritage is very insufficient in comparison with the other legislative documents that we use at the moment. Let's for suppose if you take example of Hague document, which is the Charter for preservation of tangible and intangible heritage in armed conflicts, or whether be it Venice Charter, the preamble that supports that document is more than 2 or 3 pages, 5,000, minimum 5,000, sorry, not 5,000, but minimum 2,000 words long text, which supports the actual data. So one point जहाँ पर अभी clear हो जाता है, the start is still not sufficient. Now coming to the definitions, for example, if you take the definition in second article, number 7, it talks about the protection of heritage. So it says is protected heritage means any premises, objects of archaeological, architectural, historical, cultural, or natural value declared as such by the government by notification that would include the land externally apparent such their air and outer walls thereof. Now, the definition itself talk about 2 different kinds of protections or safeguard, let's say. One is associated with immovable property, that is the building premises, different kinds of premises as the article says. And then at the same time, it's talking about the object which is immovable, which is movable entity. Now, being a researcher or being part of this fraternity, you all know that the conservation or the safeguard which requires in which is invested in both type of entities is entirely different. So it feels like here, just for the sake of checking the requirement, the term of a word has been the word of object has been used here. Apart from that, if you talk about national value, why only the objects that are important as on the national value can be, safeguarded? Now, for example, if any, because this law is dealing with a land which is multicultural, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi area, how it can be possible to just specify something which holds the national value. Let's suppose there is a very small some intangible cultural heritage which is in a smaller village of Mithi somewhere. Not it has certain value to the local community, but somehow on national level maybe it's not recognized. Then how can it be given protection when this charter is giving protection to the entire province? And then there are many other words which actually tell us how these words or these jargons have been used without understanding the underlying meaning to them, and they have been used because without understanding their meaning, it would be very disastrous, as we are going to see in the third part of our presentation, where the development projects have outlined their objectives within the specified terminology which actually exists within our law, but they went through with major what you can say major changes in the built environment, but they cannot be outlawed because they are within the written or the within जो हमारे law में लिखा हुआ है, they fall under that category. This is how this actually defines the importance of how properly drafted or properly written statements are important, and their meaning also as well. Now, the second part of presentation is basically 2020. This master plan is also called as Karachi Strategic Development Plan. Now, why we have taken this plan is because this came at the time of COVID, Of course, it was drafted much earlier, but the point of realization here is that this plan did not have any written uh, specification regarding dealing with the natural calamities, whether be it COVID, floods, or any kind of calamities. So this was one point which made it important to discuss here. So this entire master plan starts with a vision which says towards becoming a world-class city and attractive economic center with a decent life for Karachians. So by its vision, it tells you that how important it is to make Karachi as a financial hub, or majorly focus on the economic, creating it as an economic center for the city, rather than being inclusive in approach and include all other existing scenarios within it. Going further ahead, it has four main subsections where every detail is compiled within these four sections: land and housing, transportation, infrastructure services, and social services. Now, one thing to tell you, social services ke under, they have kept all the hospitals, education, and parks and recreation, which usually comes under the amenities. Now, this यहाँ पर ये conflict create हो जाता है that the terminology which has been used here, or the technical jargons which are used there, they are entirely in conflict with the existing, be in heritage legislation or in academic manuscripts. The project, interestingly, the section which deals with conservation of buildings or the heritage buildings is titled as Conservation Sites of Natural Archaeological Importance, which is again in conflict, that sites are different things, and natural sites are different things, archaeological sites are different things, because under this heading, the definition of built heritage that they have given is entirely different. So this shows that how this master plan has been written without involvement of any architectural researcher or any person from architectural discipline. So this basically talks from single monument to group of buildings to the site, and surprisingly also includes natural sites such as rivers. But at the end, the list of buildings that they have given, the 24 buildings that they have shared, does not include any natural site or any archaeological site itself. And they talk about the protection of the buildings, which is and they say about they quote the number of buildings as 600 being protected by the Sin Cultural Heritage Preservation Act, which is not correct. In 2011, there was a biggest enlistment happened in the history. I think around more than 1,300 buildings were enlisted. Until 28, there were continuous publication of new enlistments. So this is completely haphazard. Now, the proposal that they have quoted here are, they talk about some rehabilitation standards, preservation techniques that describe different types of changes, and they talk about monitoring of the preservation work that is being done. They talk about compatible new design adjacent to the historic buildings and historic neighborhoods. That means it's a plus point that the old heritage buildings will be adapted and new integrated projects will be surfacing, but this doesn't look like the case because the proposal ends just after these 6 points. So so this is the current status of the heritage what you call importance through our Karachi master plan. Uh, Lackings that we see at present in our master plan is, of course, it starts with the title of the section, which does not have any relevance with the information which it is giving. Letter, it's completely written from an economist mindset. It does not include any integrated approach, whether integration of heritage, climate, environment, or neighborhoods. So in a way, it's an hodgepodge attempt of delivering meaning and uncomprehended methods whose impact we don't know about their impacts actually. Giving you this detail is basically to let you know that the entire 26 number of quarters that our historic area is comprised of is just summed up in two towns, which is Sadr town and Jamshed town. And their distribution is further given in just merely 6 or 7 quarters, which are not even the areas specified on the registry, which is given by the Culture Ministry. So the first conflict is basically the data that is existing in both the departments is entirely different. So for a researcher like me or anyone else, if we want to consult something or some data, it's completely different. And we don't know about which one to be authentic and which one to not to be authentic, because the data both department gives is entirely different. Now, the third part, which is the most interesting part of our study, is the understanding of city as a case study. So just beginning with the city, it's very important to understand how this city originated. Uh, the city present its ideology because there wasn't any Karachi before. There was Karachi, Kolachi, Jogot, or Kalanchi, or Karanchi, which was a small fishing village ruled by the Talpur dynasty, and which used to have their capital back in Hyderabad. So the manifestation of a port town or all the technological advancements actually came with British. So in a way, the structures that are built by them, whether be public structures, public infrastructure, any kind of a building at the moment which is considered as the heritage of the city, and the town which was built by the British or the native town along with it, also built during the British colonial annexation, is considered historic town of the city at present. Talking about its designation as a historic core, this entire system of enlistment and protection of heritage era of 70s. First, when around 40 number of buildings were documented by Design Bureau by KD, process led to the preservation of the building. So legislation that we at present are dealing with, its origin is of course from the British time. Its formal enactment was during the period of 70s. So the major threats that at present we deal with are the commercialization, and commercialization is the byproduct of over influx of population in the city, which can be dealt with many reasons, but somehow we are unable to. So there is a fight between the conservationist and economic actors just because of this problem of commercialization. And not to forget here is that the cities evolve. Cities are not stagnant entities because they evolve with time. And also the systems which make them functional, which systems that make them enable them to function on their pace, they also evolve with it. But unfortunately, in case of Karachi, which I think is relevant to the entire country as well, the city has evolved, but the systems that we have at present, talking from point of view of heritage legislation, though that has not evolved. For example, we are still dealing with monument-centric conservation approaches rather than going to the historic ensembles or historic urban landscape. Because when you talk about the historic urban land, you talk about the participatory planning, you talk about the community, enhancement of the community that lives within that historic ensemble, because that is the first or the prime stakeholder of that of any project that you are dealing with in those historic ensembles. So we have seen a lot of projects happening in Karachi, where which are initiated under the name of rehabilitation or conservation, but they are merely following the attitude of gentrification or pushing the uh, local community or the local inhabitants to the margins and developing something which is not actually beneficial for them, but developing for someone else. So we have seen a lot of projects like Bahria Icon Interchange at Karachi, Asif Market, Silk Banks, and Hatem Building, and so many more. So we are going to look at a couple of projects and talk about them. Uh, so if uh, let me in because most of the people in our talk are from Karachi, so they are well aware from this project of Bahria Icon Interchange is Karachi. But let me share a little more detail about it for the people who are joining us from who are non-Karachi basically. So this was an interchange uh, which was comprised of two bridges and two underpasses and one uninterrupted thoroughfare, which led us to from Bilawal Chorangi, which is the main roundabout, to the 18 Nakwi Chorangi, which is another roundabout. And the entire span actually covered around almost 250 square meters. Now, this project actually included four historical properties, not just historical properties, but those are protected heritage properties. Uh, uh, so here is this cluster of Clifton monuments, which includes the bandstand and a promenade and open park, which is Bin Qasim Park and Mahadev Temple. And then the fourth site is Abdullah Shah Ghazi Mazar. So now we're going to look at, and then huge tower is this Bahria Icon Tower. So this entire project was in a way built to facilitate this easy access to this new development project. And in a way, it was said that all these historic properties are also conserved, which were conserved, but following the following the monument-centric approach only. The concept of urban area conservation or ensemble preservation was somehow led throughout this entire process. So we're now talking about these three sites, this Clifton Monument and Bin Qasim Park. This site is very unique because at the moment it's a park, but the time when it was built, this in Jahangir Kothari Pavilion, there used to be water. Sea level was till this point, but at the moment it's the sea has receded and this beautiful park is there. And next to it is Mahadev Temple, which is a very unique temple, because at front you just see this entrance and the entire religious chamber is inside the cave, which is accessed through this main entrance. And this is a very sacred site of Hindus because it has been venerated even in the the ancient religious inscriptions of Hindu religion as well. So it dates back even centuries old. So when this entire project was done, the historical and the spiritual value of these sites were completely ignored. How so? Because when before the project, the main entrance of main entrance of this entire complex was through the road which is in front of these monuments, and there was a certain setback which actually allowed you to go through the building, to go through the spaces which were in front of you. So you were actually feeling the space and having experience of the building from the distance. But at the moment, there is no setback. You just directly enter into the building. So a lot of decontextualized architectural conservation practices have been employed here. The most important is this entire cluster. If we can follow through the map here, right opposite to this interchange is here's a mall in front of it. So it which is considered the first shopping mall of the Clifton region. So it created a unique tourism route because people used to get out at the shopping mall, and after that they visited this site and going through this pavilion. After this, beyond this park, there is another recreational site. So in a way, it created a perfect route for a tourism, which because of the development of this project has been completely disturbed, because throughout this 300, almost 300-meter long passage, there is no connection between this side to that side, because the entire project completely ignored the pedestrian access, ignoring from the pedestrian walkways to the pedestrian bridges, overhead bridges or underground bridges. And secondly, so here a question of actual conservation rises, that what kind of development or what kind of conservation we are bringing forward, which is at the cost of the living spaces, and who is then benefiting from these sites. Because I myself am resident of this neighborhood, but I have never like there wasn't any consultation or any EIA happened during the execution of this project. So apart from the religious or apart from the people who enjoyed this tourism road, the local people that actually live in that area has not been consulted or asked about. Then further ahead to this cluster, there is tomb of Abdullah Shah Ghazi. So this is how it looked like before, and at the moment, right to the right side of the tomb, this high-rise structure is already there. So apart from heritage and spiritual values of the sites, which were very drastically ignored in all three in all four sites, here a very good blow to the intangible cultural heritage has been observed, because just because of this entire tower, entire maneuvering of this shrine has been changed. Earlier, when the site was accessed from front side, now it has access from the other side, which is completely in conflict with the devotion of the with the people who actually come here and venerate here. because when they first entered, the religious practice involved looking at the shrine as they entered through the site, which is now not part of their religious experience. So it looked like this before. Now it has been changed. The entire structure of the shrine has been uplifted, but again, when there is only upliftment happening, but the cultural values or the devotional or spiritual values of the users are ignored, there is no use of such kind of upliftment or that kind of upgradation. The second case that we are going to look at here is the Empress Market. So the project that was initiated for Empress Market was termed as an anti-encroachment project, which was driven by government of Sindh. It initiated in 2018 and it still is in process, and it has haunted a lot the city a lot. So the concept which involved actually this project was basically the government wanted to revive the Sadr as it used to be the times of British. But here the point that the cities evolve and they change with time was completely ignored. So the terms like stylistic approach, revival of the cultural spaces, and a monumental, bringing back Empress Market to its monumental landmark value. These kind of words were terms were highlighted, and because of the lack of understanding of these terms and their relevance with the context, actually resulted this kind of restoration in Empress Market. Now, let's take, for example, this term of stylistic approach. Stylistic approach is a very academic term, and it's usually, it's an Anglophonic term, basically, and it's very academic. It's basically matching to certain styles when that particular thing was made or built, or when it came into being. So reviving back to its stylistic approach was completely out of context notion, because the city evolved. At the time, if you can look at the original images of the Empress Market, so it's the only building that is standing in the larger area. There are green spaces around it, but on the contrary, this is the present situation. So bringing back to its original style was not is out of the context situation. However, the markets that developed all around this corner, they were considered encroachment, but they were not encroachments actually. They were actually legal markets. What actually is encroachment? Encroachment is encroaching or illegally occupying certain land, but these were not illegally occupied. These were the markets, those were given on lease, and later on they were legally given to the people who came through after Indian subcontinent partition in 1947 and another migration that happened during Russia-Afghan war. So unprecedented interpretation of these words actually led this kind of situation to the market. And here I would say that if proper architectural research following the meaning or the understanding of conservation theory in terms of, as per the context, if it could have been applied, the situation maybe would have been different as we see today. Although this monument is still protected under the Sindh Cultural Heritage Preservation Act, but somehow the conservation theory was not applied to it, or if applied, it was applied as without any understanding to the context, because conservation theory is universal. Its application changes from region to region with context. And here we can see this missing information and preamble has led us to this kind of disastrous project. So we can realize here, हम देख सकते हैं कि एक literature का होना कितना जरूरी है at this point of practice. So giving you a very small example of how a better choice from a stylistic approach to the contemporary or the modern approach with the conservation can be applied. This actually is so we are talking about St. Lambert Chapel, which is part of the Arenberg Castle. Arenberg Castle is basically part of Catholic University in Leuven, Belgium, which is around 45 miles away from the capital of Belgium, Brussels. So it's a university town, and as the university was built in 16th century, so the entire buildings and the small town are donated to the university. So this castle was later on donated to the university as well. So the time when it was used as a castle, there was a small chapel which was existing on a small hilltop and surrounded by thick foliage of trees was there. And then in the year around 1913, it was partly demolished because of the German bombing First World War. So it was like that. As it was adopted by the university, and I forgot to tell you that within this castle, the Raymond Lemaire International Center for Conservation is situated, and Raymond Lemaire was a person, a conservationist who is actually rapporteur of the Venice Charter, and is the reason behind many of the UNESCO related legislation that we have at present. So he went for modern restoration rather than the stylistic restoration, which could have been the way it was built. Rather than he went to the modern restoration, which actually involved a lot of use of concrete, if you can see on the ceilings, and glass. The reason for adapting to these two different materials was it gave the original look as it was at the time of bombing, because a lot of people have nostalgic values associated with it. So rather than giving it or recreating it or reconstructing all the missing parts, it was more appropriate to preserve it in a way that it stops from further decay and then it prolongs for the further years. So this was a very practical solution, I would say. We have many other projects such as Homing Satrak mentioned, where the heritage value is somehow overlooked. We have projects like Safe Bank and Habib Bank Limited. So coming to this point that now coming to the conclusion, the major problem at the moment that we see as devastation or vandalism to the heritage, there are many reasons. Commercialization, overpopulation, and whatnot. But the basic thing that actually consolidates these all problems is the legislation, and again the research involved while writing those legislation, the appropriate terminology or the jargon used, or the applicability of that entire legislative system that is that is without the context. And then who can tell us that it's in the context or not within the context? It's basically the researcher who is whether involved in any project or not. So I will end this conversation on a question mark that that it's very much important to conserve a place, but it's very much challenging to conserve it with its holistic value. And I think in this scenario, only a good researcher or a good thoroughly researched project can justify to this notion. So I think I
Thank you
was
so much, Tania,
clear
for this.
enough.
Really
Yeah.
appreciate it. Can I request you to close the thing and then we can just jump into the thing? Thank you, Tania. Thank you so much for this enriching conversation. I would like to just share just one slide here, and I think this would be an interesting thing to talk about. This is a page while I was listening to you. So yeah, I mean, this is one of your slides reminded me of one of the sections I was working on last year. And here I would like to read out, and then maybe we'll extend out into a conversation. Here, the paragraph that I had written was, Shore made famous by the 18th century Saint Abdullah Shah Ghazi. He has been the city's designated troubleshooter since he arrived here as a horse trader. If you have an urgent problem that the living can't help with, you will walk up the stairs of the shrine, you offer a prayer and maybe a handful of rose petals. Your problems may not be solved immediately, but you come out feeling better. Now Karachi's savior saint himself is in trouble. Ghazi has a new upstart neighbor, the Behria Icon Tower, a pair of buildings including 162-story high that will be Pakistan's highest building and the country's first proper skyscraper. The project, though unfinished, doesn't just dwarf the saint's shrine. It has surrounded it with ugly prison-like walls, making the shrine invisible and very, very difficult to access. The architecture looks more like an Abu Dhabi borrowed aesthetics. Like any wise saint living by the sea, here Muhammad Hanif says in his article, Ghazi, according to the folklore, chose to set his shrine at the top of a hillock. The green and the white striped dome used to be visible from miles away. Its open courtyards and surrounding empty spaces have hosted thousands of people every day and hundreds of thousands on public holidays and on the anniversary of Ghazi's death. This is the development model of Karachi has followed. There are signal-free corridors for car owners, but hardly any footpaths for the millions who walk to work. There are air-conditioned shopping malls for the affluent consumers, but the police hound street vendors claiming that they're a threat to the public sector. McDonald's occupies the prime spot on the beach, and that's become the smelliest part of the city. Developers cared more about the parking lot than the sewage system. Than the sewage system and the waste dumped in the Arabian Sea. But then who needs the sea or a saint to protect against it when we can have infinity pools in the sky? Muhammad Hanif extends and writes that Abdullah Shah Ghazi himself is lost in the midst of this architecture. So it was just a little bit of a query here that while I was reading this, I wanted to bring on this aspect of urbanization to you and talk about the future of this heritage that we think not from a nostalgic lens, but more from the little bit of queries that you had put together, especially when you were talking about new liberal decisions of the city. And what does it mean to have an inclusive master plan? What does it mean to have a well-integrated master plan? And what does it mean to think in colonized methodology of today's architecture? How are we including those built environment into our newer master plans, and then thinking of separation of classes? These are some of the very eminent queries that came out of your presentation. And I would like to now extend a question here to you, Tania, that what does it mean from not just from a researcher's perspective and the lens that you talked about, but also from an educationist as well as from practice. from whatever your past, life was before you entered PhD. What do you think is now the condition when we look at these public projects that you brought in, but then there are some smaller projects, smaller houses, apartment buildings who are under violence on everyday basis. So what do you think? What comes to your mind?
Uh, Thank you, Marvi. This looks like a very challenging question because see, in city in Karachi, everyday scenario changes from whether be it conservation, whether be it dealing with climate change, anything. The prime problem here is that I've observed through my experience or consultation of documents, going to the archives or discussing with people. Somehow the built environment is considered in isolation to its context. The intangible aspects that actually are the most important elements of any project, whether not we are not depending on the scale. It's context, which is comprised of everything. It's roots, it's views, the noise it creates. Somehow it's not considered part of the larger conservation project. And always the conservation is seen from just monument centric approach. So I think this is the major problem, and our legislation system actually consolidate this approach. If you talk about intangible aspects, for example, the streetscape in historic towns, it has a very diverse nature. So there are a lot of thela standing, and a lot of people who are mobile vendors और वो आवाजें देते हैं अपनी चीजें सेल करते जाते हैं. So all together they create a context of that entire street. And whenever we talk about conserving that system, conservation doesn't mean eliminating all these elements and just putting a building there, but conservation means organization, rearrangement of all those systems which are actually part of that entire system. So मेरे ख्याल से वो that aspect is somehow overlooked in all contexts, whether be it built environment, whether be it healthcare facilities or education. We don't think critically about other elements rather than something which is physically in front of our eyes. So I think critical thinking lack of critical thinking is the prime issue here.
Yeah, thanks, Tania. I mean, also I also feel like critical thinking and critical analysis, these are also queries of academia and a certain percent. But then mostly in South Asian complexities, we do see that the awareness and simple logistics of bylaws is not broken down for an everyday user. So, for example, how much do we know about our constitutional rights? And in the same way, I feel like, the future of architecture in terms of from heritage perspective, most of the rupture takes place when the bylaws are not broken down on an everyday language. So here the language plays a huge role. The law itself sounds like such a dry and such a top-down language itself, something that one could analyze and make it. Yes, I always quote this in my lectures, and I say that, polio ke katre is such an important tagline that we hear it from everybody, and it's become like a nuance of everyday understanding that how important it is to get your drops. It is almost like life-threatening thing if you don't. And it's now broken down into several languages, and the advertisements, the state is involved. In that way, I feel like the urban decisions need to be made on such a level where it becomes like a larger conversation rather than a nucleus perspectives. I would like to request my counterpartner who has helped me develop this webinar, Huzaifa, if you like to jump in and ask a question. for Tania, and we open up this thing for the audience. We would love to hear from you if anybody is interested to jump into the discussion. Yes, Tania.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. Just before we go to Huzefa, I would like to add some point here. Marvi, you talked about the South Asian context. So in South Asian context, if we look at our neighbors, India, Mumbai is very similar to our context. So there is studying their Mumbai regional plan was something that was an eye opener for me, because the way they have included the existing systems within it. Because what I found in while studying this Karachi strategic plan, was that we were talking about everything new. And the question that was the main probing constantly through this plan was how to make this. So we were building up our narrative on the future, something that we want to achieve, or this is the goal. But we somehow forget about what existing system that we have. So it was not part of the plan at all. So this Mumbai regional plan, which is developed by the Mumbai Metropolitan Authority, and it's such a nice case study where they have involved actually the existing heritage council, existing healthcare system, and then they talk about upgradation of the existing system in their master plan, not just going towards how we can
Absolutely.
so
I mean, in our last talk,
it's a very yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely correct, because in our last conversation with Mariam Nizam, she did pick up on the ideology of like bringing the departments and how those interwoven together make a decision of the appropriate larger infrastructure. And of course, here, the most important thing as an annexure is added the politics of archives. I mean, that itself plays such a huge role. How are you including I mean, when you keep on emphasizing on intangible, I feel like intangible is such an a critical part, where you talk about certain neighborhoods, you talk about certain history, memory, family inheritance, everything comes into it, but also deconstructing the archives itself. So that means everyday documentation plays a huge role, which we of course there's a huge a gap over there, there's a void there. So yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing that part with me. Huzefa, would you like to jump in?
Yes, so my question was, as you pointed out, that the researcher plays an important role in the preservation of Karachi, and how they bring data, correct data to like the governmental organizations to preserve the architecture, etc. I was wondering if there are some limitations in how research works currently in Karachi in protecting the archaeological sites of Karachi.
Thank you, Huzefa. This is very, I think, very appropriate question, and I forgot to talk about it. At the moment, research is happening, but the research is not well integrated. Professional people are doing their own projects. There is no connection or no integration of the both bodies, I would say. So I had no idea, because I sitting in NED, which is right next to this Kuchai Ilm o Sakafat, which is education and culture zone, currently known as People's Square. So while this project was commenced, we being part of academia, or we being researchers, we were not involved in it. So I don't know how much research is being involved in organization of any projects, and even their execution. There's a bigger question mark on this thing. But there is research happening, but we now need to work on institutional integration, which is very lacking at the moment.
And interesting, yeah, that how they call these projects the people's project. and it's all about the people, but yet the people are missing from the context.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tania, for this really interesting conversation. And we have a question here from Sabah Akbar. Sabah, would you like to unmute yourself and ask? Please, guys, get involved. This is an exciting conversation that's taking place now into a different direction of how people interact with heritage. If you would like to, please, Sabah, go ahead.
Hi, first of all, I want to say that thank you for such an informative talk. And yeah, I've been also listening to some other talks and it's been super interesting, and it's good to see that something new and this kind of dialogue is going on in terms of heritage. So yeah, my question
Thank you for logging in.
my question to you, Tania, is okay, since we've established that research is very important in terms of heritage, so when does it become important for the government to base their big urban decisions on the researches and studies being done? Or do you think that we are that it's like we are fairly new to this studying, this kind of studying the historical and anthropological aspects of heritage, and that maybe it will take time for the government to start recognizing the significance of research or the researcher? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabah. What I can say here is there is zero interest by the government. I showed you the example of Karachi Strategic Plan 2020, and it was the unique example which you can see how less research or even zero research was followed while drafting this document. Because the facts that were even quoted within that document, they were not correct. They quoted around 600 heritage buildings, but at the moment, the existing number of the buildings is much more, or even some less. We don't know, because there's a constant publication of notified lists every 2 years. So, and also the titles or the quotations that they have used are completely irrelevant or totally opposite to what we have at present in our heritage legislation or any other academic literature that we follow. So there is, from my perspective, I think there is a dire need to develop a collaboration between the institutes, and particularly on government level, because multiple departments such as culture department, urban development sections, they all work together. They need to work together because eventually they are working for the same cause. But when there will not be any unanimity between the departments, how can a better one can expect for the better results? So this is completely missing, I think, at the moment. Collaboration at the department level.
Collaborations, alliances, these are all very important aspects, and surely research is completely last on their checklist, and that's why half of the time we are struggling to do advocacy towards spreading a voice, or sharing some kind of information in the city is always through advocacy or activism, rather than going through a chapter of what Tania is emphasizing, that research should be part of the annexure. It should be understood that whenever you enter into a project, there should be certain aspect dedicated to research. So then every time there is, you've kind of developed a horizontal network, and then you just build upon it, rather than चार दीवारी की एक आपने अपनी खुद की एक जमीन बना लिया और उस पे आप अलग-अलग isolation में काम कर रहे हैं. That makes what the city, that's the unfortunate part that one has always felt in our practices, that there's a lot of individual nexus or nucleus. Rather than working and developing on existing information and growing vertically, we keep on doing horizontal research. And I feel that's something that a lot of like energy goes on that. What do you think, Tania? I mean, that's what how we feel like, you know, at least our generation.
Of course, Marvi, because while you are doing anything, any project, or you are doing any writing assignment, there are number of documents that are developed, and somehow those documents are not published, and they're lost through the process. And if one if they can be shared and used, a lot of energy could be saved. So I think there is a problem in data repository or the data sharing platforms. We really need to think about them, because on government level, a lot of research or projects are being done, but where because we don't see anything on at the end. Somehow they are all lost in the process.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Tania. I mean, if there are any other questions, and then I'm going to conclude here and just going to share a little bit for our next session. So if there are any other questions, if I'm not missing out anybody. Yes, Maz, I was waiting. Go ahead. Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing and elaborating on the definitions on heritage and preservation and everything that involves the process. Uh, Theoretically speaking, these things are important to consider, but unfortunately, reality for us is really different. I don't have a particular question, but I'll just share briefly my experiences with the Heritage Department. And um, as as um, as someone who lives in the city and claims to be a part of it and owns it, uh, the experience with Heritage Department has not been a pleasant one. I was part of the Burns Road redesign project, and the last thing we recommended them to do was the first thing, in fact, was to restore the buildings. And we all saw what happened, and someone had to write about it and protest against it for it to stop, for them to stop working on it. Similarly, this happened at Fair Hall. It was too late, and again at Empress Market. And even in the Empress Market scenario, we had to go and protest and be on the media just to be able to be heard. And so I just have this question. Firstly, how do we begin to have this collaborative process in anything regarding heritage and its conservation? Secondly, how do we approach or begin to raise awareness or create awareness in the public about our city and its heritage? And the most important question that I've been recently thinking of is about what is the process to even begin thinking about restoration and preservation of buildings that are in a really bad condition. I recently went and documented this building in a Ramswamy quarters, which is partially demolished, or they claim it that it just collapsed on its own. And we all know that's not the case. So how do we begin to even save what we have now? And how do we spread awareness for this? I hope that made sense.
Thanks, Maz.
Thank you, Mars, for bringing forward this very interesting question. So let me give you a reality check that we are actually part of a country where we are still dealing with basic necessities like access to clean water, electricity, and nowadays fuel. The gas shortage that we have at present. So in this entire scenario, heritage and its preservation, its safeguard is the least priority, and it comes like at the end of the checklist that usually the government has. So I think we can be vigilant in our actions if we see something happening to the buildings, if we see some deliberate demolitions happening, or something which is awkward, which comes under the section of vandalism. We can report it We can give constant reminders to the institution, and institution here is the culture department, and at least that's what we can do. And in case of if you own a building and you want to restore it, then the first step in this process is to actually contact the culture department and ask for the given requirements, because as per if a building is protected heritage by the department, it's their responsibility first to actually help you restore that building, or at least help you find some resources, which has never happened so far in our scenario, because as I told you, heritage comes as the least priority. But then, you know, the steps can help you in identification of consultants, and you know what better contextualized restoration measure can be taken for safeguarding that building. And regarding the second question, which was creating awareness, so I think awareness starts at home. And if you look, if you see something bad happening to the buildings, not just the monumental buildings or the properties, but if you look at something, something which is not appropriate for even the urban area where those buildings are happening, you can actually be the watch person for that thing. So I think it starts with personnel. What do you say, Marvi? Would you like to
I
add up
am
on
an
this?
idealistic person. So my first question to
Yes.
Maz's answer would be that keep writing, keep pestering, keep giving them
Yeah.
design proposals. I've just sent you an example, and it works out somehow, you know. So keep your ally, like keep talking to the department, and it works out. And don't lose your hope by just yeah. I mean, Burns Road was just a little bit of a project of ego, but generally speaking, the department does listen and does incorporate your advice and decisions. And if you're considered, and if you're thinking that, you know, does that make any consultancy or do you earn from it? Yes, you do. There are possibilities, and those things happen when you are keep talking about heritage and keep raising your concerns. Then you are part of the decision-making understanding. And the second thing about awareness, I would say, one thing that's missing right now, which we see in other South Asian cities, is a group of alliance. Like, you know, when there are like these international groups like ICOMOS, you have charters, you have ICOM, you have these international pages or chapters who have their local region offices, like ICOMOS does. And something that you can start off from is to become a member there. You know, there are a lot of benefits. Once you have a membership card, you can go around the world with free entries and all of that, and then you get invited to conferences, etc. But what is the real problem is that we don't have any local chapter of our own group. Like, imagine having a Karachi Heritage Alliance group, which meets every month, which has corner meetings, which talks about activism and radical information and mapping and all of that. See, one person or two people can't do this. Tania in her NED Institute, or Dr. Anila, and you know, there are a handful of people who are working on heritage in Karachi. With this large population, there should be many coming out of institutes. Should have communities, you know, institute should have a club of heritage club, and those form into a larger alliance of a Karachi chapter. And then you think about, like, how can we extend? It's like PCAT or IAP. You know, you need to have some kind of platform. And these should not be restricted for architects. It should be opened for all kinds of practitioners, artists, illustrators, journalists, to be part of this Heritage Alliances thinking. And this is like an ideal situation if that takes place. I mean, I always imagine dreaming that I'll wake up in the morning and there'll be a group of people connecting and meeting for chai and thinking, how can we, you know, extend this conversation. So that's my 2 bits on this. So I'm completely idealistic and I feel it can happen. So I think any other questions? I mean, I see Faryal here. Okay. So thank you so much, Tania, for your time. I hope, Maz, we kind of answered your question and you got some out of it. If not, of course, we're going to talk more about it.